Alrighty, now that we know about the necessary formula for constructing a confidence interval of the difference between two sample means, we're going to go ahead and actually do that computation now and construct the confidence interval. So starting right here, as part of the Pew Internet and American Life project, researchers conducted 2 surveys in 2012. The first survey asked a random sample of 799 U.S. teens about their use of social media and the internet. A second survey posed a similar question to a random sample of 2,252 U.S. adults. In these 2 studies, 80% of teens and 69% of adults use social networking sites. So first, we will calculate the standard error of the sampling distribution of the difference in the sample proportions, and then interpret what that value tells us. We just figured out that formula in the previous section here. That's our best guess at the standard deviation of the difference in sample proportions, using the sample proportions rather than the population proportions, which we don't know in this case. So if we want to find standard error, we need to know a few things. We need to know, first of all, what's the sample proportion from the first population? That was the teens. That's 80%. And then what's the sample proportion from the second population? That's the adults, 69%. And then the corresponding sample sizes, 799 teens, 2,253 adults. And now we can compute the standard error using that formula that we just mentioned. So the standard error of the difference of p hat 1 and p hat 2 is equal to this big square root, where we want to take the first, the 2 terms here. The first term is about the teens, the first population. So the population that do use social media times the population that don't, divided by the sample size, plus, it's a little big, for the second term, we're talking about the adults, so that's the population that do use social media times the population that don't, divided by the sample size. Okay, and so then we just go to our calculator. I've already entered it in, and our calculator will tell us that that value is 0.017. So 0.017, that's our value. So the next thing is to interpret what this value means. So this is the standard error of the difference in the 2 proportions. Okay, Parker's done with his retake, good. And the standard error is an approximation of the standard deviation. We know standard deviation means typical distance from the mean. So standard error here in this case is telling us that the actual difference, the difference in sample proportions, that's what we're interested in, for teens and adults who use social media, always include context, is going to differ from the true, so for the sample proportions, is going to differ from the true difference in proportions by about this much, typically. So, in other words, this difference in sample proportions will typically be about 0.017 away from the true difference in proportions. Okay, so hopefully we're getting a sense of this. It's definitely tricky to phrase this all correctly. A lot of repetition of ideas, but just be careful that you're understanding that the standard error, standard deviation means typical distance from the mean, and then always apply that to context correspondingly. All right, in the next video, we'll go ahead and actually compute the confidence interval.